Assalamu alaikum, you're watching Views and News and I'm Faisal Rahman live from our Islamabad studios. Today, two-day international parliamentary seminar was held on Kashmir in Islamabad, and the interesting part was that the Prime Minister was there and a couple of very strong statements were issued by the Prime Minister. And I want to talk about that. First of all, he said the world needs to tell India enough is enough. Obviously, it's been more than 70 years that we have been witnessing the atrocities going on in the Indian occupied Kashmir, and these are not state-sponsored, but rather this is an absolute example of state terrorism. If you just look at the last almost four and a half months, you'll see that more than 150 people, mostly youngsters, they were brutally murdered by the Indian Army. You look at the number of injured, that has exceeded 17,500. I'm giving you the official figures of the Foreign Office. You talk about those who have been blinded, that's well over 7,000, out of which 3,000 have been totally blinded by the use of those pellet guns. You talk about certain draconian laws, whether it's POTA or other than that, that's there and nobody can do anything about the Indian Armed Forces. You talk about the number, that has significantly jumped from 750,000 to over 1 million now. So for every 7 Kashmiris, there is one man in uniform to create havoc for them, to create hell for them, and that is the largest living hell. That's what most people say out there at the moment. Now, it's been 70 years. Whatever the Kashmiris can do, they're doing. Pakistan has always supported them, whether it's the diplomatic support or the moral support or the political support. But having said that, now a lot more needs to be done, and the Prime Minister this time has very categorically mentioned that this case needs to be highlighted, it needs to be discussed, and needs to be marketed in an appropriate manner, whether it is about the use of the United Nations or it is the use of the Security Council or other friendly countries for that matter. So this two-day international seminar on Kashmir was conducted today, and Prime Minister very clearly mentioned that Kashmir is your jugular vein. That means it is a matter of life or death for Pakistan and for those people. To talk about this, we have with us in our studio is Lord Nazir Ahmad Khan. Needs no introduction, so thank you very much for taking out your time and being a part of the show. So before we start the discussion, our production team has prepared a package. Let's watch that and then we'll continue from there.
At the time, Kashmiris living on both sides of the line of control and the world over are observing Right to Self-Determination Day, National Assembly Secretariat and Young Parliamentarians Forum organized International Parliamentary Seminar on Kashmir. In her welcome address, Secretary General of Young Parliamentarians Forum deplored that the Indian authorities do not allow the participants from occupied Kashmir to attend the seminar.
We are happy to see that most of the panelists from Canada, European Union, and United Kingdom are here. But as expected, majority of those invited from Indian-occupied Kashmir were not allowed by Indian authorities. They were unlawfully detained for several hours for interrogation and were freed only after thorough harassment and their personal belongings being confiscated.
The Young Parliamentarian Forum deserves our joint appreciation for organizing this important seminar as part of the National Assembly's ongoing effort to highlight Kashmir issues on all international forums. The suffering of Kashmiris were placed by me before the Inter-Parliamentary Union General Assembly in Geneva held last October. I also raised it in the strongest possible manner before the Executive Committee of the Parliamentary Union of Islamic Countries, which was held in Ankara last year.
Speaking on the occasion, Advisor on Foreign Affairs Sartaj Aziz said, Jammu and Kashmir dispute is a stigma on the international process.
For the last 70 years, 3 successive generations of Kashmiri people have held aloft their aspirations for Azadi with zeal and with commitment. Throughout this period, this relentless struggle has continued despite the harshest measures adopted by India. The presence of more than 700,000 occupation forces for around 12 million people of the Indian-occupied Kashmir is a clear manifestation of the Indian policy to use state terrorism as a tool to suppress the just struggle of the Kashmiri people.
Aiming to raise plight of people of Indian-occupied Kashmir, the seminar is being attended by foreign dignitaries and parliamentarians from 20 countries and experts. 400 national delegates comprising members of parliament, academicians and students also participating in the event. International speakers criticized United Nations and world powers for their silence on Kashmir issue.
We keep telling our government that their moral political responsibility for the Kashmiris is that they should have given them, at least if they've not given them the right of self-determination at that time because Maharaja decided to stay where he was, but nevertheless they should have supported the Kashmiri people afterwards. And today they should have mediated between India and Pakistan to resolve the issue of Kashmir.
It was unanimous voice of all participants that India is conducting a systematic genocide in Kashmir and lingering Kashmir issue must be solved to avoid instability in the region.
Thousands of youths who, under the tyranny of the Indian occupation forces, have raised the flag of Kashmir. It's very easy to talk about Kashmir liberation. It's all very easy to talk about the United Nations Security Council resolutions, the responsibility of the international community. It is very difficult to raise the slogan of Azadi, freedom, in Srinagar and in all townships of Indian-occupied Kashmir. This is what the youth of Kashmir has done. Applause for them and our appreciation.
To ensure peace and stability in the most populated region of the world, the solution of Kashmir issue as per wishes of Kashmiris is essential, and recent uprising in occupied Kashmir showed that India cannot suppress Kashmiris anymore. The parliamentarians from across the globe gathered here, and they have only one question from United Nations and Western democracies, that India is continuing its atrocities in Kashmir, and until when they will remain silent on this. Shabbir Ahmed Wagra, PTV World, Islamabad.
There was Shabbir Ahmed Wagra who reported on this conference which was arranged by the Youth Parliamentarians Forum. Now, interestingly, a couple of very important points that came under discussion. We've been doing programs on one very important issue, I would say, that is about the demographic changes by the Indians in Kashmir. And when we look at the way they are settling those non-Kashmiris in Kashmir, that is the prime concern and is indeed one of the very important issues that need to be highlighted. Another important aspect is about the human rights violation. When we talk about pellet guns, let me also tell you that these pellet guns are like shotguns, which we normally use for hunting purposes. And they are practically fired upon the faces. The eyesight, they've lost the eyesight. And look at the faces, we've always shown you on TV. But to talk about this issue, we have been joined in by Sartaj Aziz Saab, the advisor to the Prime Minister on Foreign Affairs. Sir, Assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much for talking to us, sir.
Assalamu alaikum.
Sartaj Aziz Saab, first of all, tell us about the major features of this particular Youth Parliamentarians Forum, sir. How effective was that, and how well the issue was marketed today, sir?
Well, I think it is a very important landmark conference because it is attended by a very large number of parliamentarians and experts from abroad. And also the situation in Kashmir on the ground has entered a new phase after 8 July, when the totally indigenous and youth-led movement for Azadi started on the 8th of July with the Shahadat of Muzaffar Burhan Wani. And that has created a totally new situation. And if one really analyzes, this movement has gathered momentum for the last 5 months. Despite so much repression and human rights violation, it is still proceeding with great deal of zeal and enthusiasm, and people are really charged. Now, one reason for that is the Indian policy, first vis-a-vis minorities and Muslims, the discrimination, and second, within Kashmir, to start changing the demographic composition of Kashmir by settling people and giving them property rights. Because previously this was not allowed under the Indian Constitution. They have passed a new law in which they can confiscate property and sell it to non-Kashmiris, outsiders. And also Kashmiri Pandits who were actually immigrants from Pakistan, they are also being settled. So this combination of factors and the Modi's policy against Muslims and minorities has created this strong reaction. And Kashmiris have never said they would like to stay within India. And this has increased this demand for Azadi, and it has become a very violent movement, a strong, a very forceful movement and peaceful movement. Now, this situation, I think, creates new compulsion for the international community that they have ignored this issue for the last 70 years. I mean, ever since UN passed those resolutions, the implementation has not been effective. And now there is voices coming from within India that Indian contention that this is not an issue, there's nothing to talk about except cross-border terrorism is no longer tenable, and the Kashmir issue does require serious negotiations. So I think this conference coming at this particular point of time will explore these issues and hopefully indicate further efforts that we have to make abroad and in Pakistan and in Kashmir, how to carry this process forward and lead this intifada to some successful direction so that a durable and lasting solution according to the wishes of the Kashmiri people can be found.
Now, sir, a couple of more points. I mean, we always talk about the political, moral and diplomatic support for the Kashmiris. And we have always done that. We've always stood by our brothers in Kashmir. But sir, what else needs to be done? Considering this is year 2017, the global dynamics are changing very rapidly, new alliances are emerging. So what else needs to be done now, sir? And how effectively and how quickly that needs to be done?
You see, it is true that the Kashmir issue has remained unresolved, but I think the manner in which the Kashmiri people have now asserted themselves for their rights of self-determination is now something that cannot be ignored. And I think there is a large body of expatriate Kashmiris abroad in Europe and America. They have a very special responsibility to bring these to their respective parliaments and their respective media, because I think ultimately it is the spirit of the people. When the people decide to fight for their rights and rise up, it cannot be ignored for very long. And now this has been demonstrated very strongly. I hope that this will create a new momentum of highlighting the human rights violation, highlighting the importance of the right to self-determination, and the urgency and importance of finding some durable solutions. So this is where we are today, and I hope in the coming weeks and months this issue will receive further importance. Pakistan, of course, will continue to provide moral, diplomatic and political support to this movement by highlighting the Indian atrocities, by highlighting the importance of their right of self-determination, and hopefully when the negotiations start, at that time to support the Kashmiris' resolve, as well as remind the international community that this right has been promised to them not only by the United Nations, but the founding fathers of India itself, that you have to decide your future yourself. And so
that is last comment, sir. So that's our Foreign Office has been really active recently. The Prime Minister has instructed that the parliamentarians, they need to go out and present the case, whether it's Turkey or it's France or it's Europe or it's Hague, you name it, and they're there now. Now, my point is, sir, that obviously the government's will is there. The kind of energy or the momentum that the Foreign Office has gained is remarkable. We really appreciate that. But sir, recently we have witnessed that whenever we talk about peace in Afghanistan, so Pakistan, the Russians as well as the Chinese, they met in Moscow and then they came up with a certain formula. So that means that Pakistan is really gearing up at the international top level. Can't we use centers like SCO for that matter, or SARC is pretty ineffective, or certain other forums where we can sort of engage Russia or China or France or Britain for that matter to put pressure on India, sir, because it seems that it is not enough on the Indians to sort of come up with a viable solution, sir.
Well, I think first of all, we have received very strong support from 56 OIC countries. I think the OIC has been passing resolution in the contact group on Kashmir, but the kind of resolution they adopted at the OIC summit in Istanbul last April is quite remarkable. It's very comprehensive and has been very forcefully done. So that is number one. Number two, many other countries have tried to support our cause, particularly, Russian statement recently and some other statements which show that when an issue is so serious that it threatens the security of the subcontinent, apart from human rights violation, and affects the economic prospects of the entire region, then it does require a solution. So there are three dimensions. One is the human rights dimension, one is the security dimension, the third is the economic prospect of this region. The British Foreign Secretary, who was here a month ago, he said that if this whole region becomes peaceful and the disputes are resolved, the tremendous potential that it has, the entire Central Asia, South Asia, West Asia, can be exploited. And so it's a very important dimension of the next 10, 20 years that the region becomes peaceful and achieves this economic potential.
Absolutely.
So the compulsions to find a solution are increasing, and I hope that this conference held today will add further momentum to this.
All right. Thank you very much, Sartaj sir. And that was the time actually when the British Secretary for Foreign Affairs also talked about the CPEC, and he said we want to be a part of it. But Lord Nazir sir, you heard what the advisor to the Prime Minister said. I mean, Pakistan is doing whatever they could have done, and especially if you look at the last 6 months or so, post Mr. Wani's brutal murder, I would say, things have really changed. There is a new momentum which we have witnessed. The engagement of youth, that is at the optimum level. They have killed, they have done whatever they, and the Indian forces, they are targeting youth in particular this time, sir. They're changing their dynamics as well. They've increased the number of forces there. I mean, the engagement level has increased as well. Brutalities, they were there, but their magnitude has increased again at a very, very hyper level, I would say. Your takes, sir, overall, first of all, regarding the effort which Pakistanis or the young parliamentarians have put in arranging this particular conference or the forum. Let's start off from there, sir.
First of all, I appreciate this conference, this seminar, international seminar, because young people are involved and there were many young people at the seminar. But the most important point that you've made in relation to the second intifada is that this is indigenous. These are young people who came out to protest. You mentioned all the figures. One thing I think you probably forgot to mention is 10,000 of them who are held in custody.
Yeah.
Who are held in custody since the uprising. And so we need to be demanding, the international community needs to be demanding that those young people be released. But I think there are other significant issues which are being raised at international level. For instance, the High Commissioner for Human Rights on 13th of September in his opening speech very clearly mentioned that there have been huge abuses of human rights in Kashmir.
Correct.
And he said that we need to have a very open access, international delegation needs to go, investigators need to go and get the facts. And basically he said he needed Pakistan and India both to agree. Well, Pakistan immediately wrote back and said, you are most welcome to come and see the facts on ground.
On our side of the border.
Of course.
But when you talk about the other side,
Pakistan cannot allow anybody into Indian occupied part of Kashmir. But the second point I think here is Article 99 of the United Nations Charter very clearly gives powers to the Secretary General, asking him where he sees a threat to regional peace or world peace or and security, then he's under obligation or he has a duty to report the matter to Security Council. Well, here you've seen whether it is the Indian government very clearly said that this strike that's supposed to have happened inside Pakistan, the surgical strike,
so-called surgical strike.
Surgical strike, but then also the firing on the line of control, attacking Pakistani posts, but more importantly, the civilians, ambulances, school buses, and children. I know families, they're not my relatives, but they are like my relatives. Families in the Bhimber sector, in Mirpur, in Tattapani, in Neelam Valley, where people have been targeted, people have been killed, people have... Now, the important thing is that UN observers on the line of control, both India and Pakistan, first of all, in 1949, when they were sent because of the resolution passed and then Karachi agreement, that access will be given to UN observers on both sides of line of control so they can report back to Security Council. Sadly, after the 1971 war, in January 1972, India stopped their movement. They allow them to be housed. They provide them with office. They allow them to roam around.
Are they limited to Delhi only?
They are not even allowed to go to Kashmir.
That's what I'm saying. They're only limited to Delhi.
But Pakistan allows access everywhere, and these observers actually send a report to the United Nations on a regular basis. First, we need to demand that those reports should be made public. At the moment, they just go to some bureaucrat in the United Nations and they just go into a file and nobody sort of talks about that. That's number one. The second one is that the Secretary General has a duty that he needs to report this matter to the Security Council, because there's a real war, there's a real threat of war.
That is called the nuclear flashpoint, sir.
Absolutely, and because so many people have been killed, soldiers on both sides of line of control have been killed, and so because of the tension, and BJP is wanting to win elections in at least 5 or 6 states. But that doesn't mean that you need to kill Kashmiris and Pakistanis to win.
That is the way forward for them.
Well,
anti-Pakistan bashing.
Yeah.
Then we talk about being more, I would say, hard towards the Kashmiris, just to set an example that, look, this is what we are doing, so we need to win.
Well, that's really.
But unfortunately, that formula works in India, sir.
Well, Hindutva and also RSS, BJP, Shiv Sena, all of them, Bajrang Dal, these are extremist groups that are part of Mr. Modi's coalition. And of course, you know,
And they follow the same ideology, the anti-Muslim or the anti-minority.
Sartaj Aziz Saab speaking with logic, with very calm voice, and you see Modi like he's out of Bollywood film, like a villain from Bollywood film, where he has to show the movement of his hands that we will do this and we will conquer an Akhand Bharat, and the ambition of sort of taking over other countries in the region. Having said all that, which we know that, and I think, you know, I tell you, there are many parliamentarians, my own colleagues, who have told me that they don't like his language because it's not a diplomatic or an international standard of a politician to speak in such manner, in such actions that he does. But there is international responsibility. First, I think, as a British government, if anybody from Britain, our High Commission or Foreign Office is watching this program, they need to actually think about this, because first of all, we have some moral, we have some political, and also I don't think we have got legal responsibility, but our historic responsibility that the right of self-determination for the Kashmiri people should have been given, because it was our baggage that we left in this region.
Absolutely, sir. And that since it is it's going to be a long debate, I'm sure. But right now we've been joined by Shaza Khawja. She's the Joint Secretary for the Young Parliamentarians, MNA from Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz. Assalamu alaikum, Shaza Khawja.
Walaikum salam.
Thank you very much for taking out your time. Earlier we were watching you in our report. And first of all, congratulations on holding such a forum, such a seminar. First of all, ma'am, let's start off from the very basic. How effective this particular forum was in your own perspective?
See, the idea, the vision of the Honorable Speaker was that we need to, the Parliament now needs to, you know, even though we've been passing resolutions and the Parliament has been discussing the Kashmir issue as, you know, how vital it is for Pakistan. But the idea of this particular conference was that on an international arena, following the convoys that were sent by the Honorable Prime Minister, the Parliament now needs to take the lead and put this agenda forward. There were multiple purposes that we had in mind. One of which was to engage the young people, the upcoming generations in Pakistan. You know about the youth pulse of the country, and that youth needs to be sensitized appropriately about the issue, so that, you know, we have younger people who will carry on the struggle for us. Another issue or I would rather say another purpose was that we needed these international delegates We've had a couple of MEPs coming from the European Parliament, people from House of Lords. We had academicians. We have journalists here from North America. So the purpose was to hear them out as to what they have to say about the Kashmir issue, because this issue really, it's not bilateral anymore. The issue is an international issue. Until the Kashmir issue is resolved, the ball is completely in United Nations court to fulfill the resolutions that have been passed regarding Kashmir. So these were a couple of purposes that we had in mind, and I think that the inaugural ceremony with the Honorable Prime Minister addressing it himself was a very good manifestation of how strongly Pakistan feels about Kashmir and our relentless, unfaltering support for the cause. So I really believe that
you really mentioned something very important
very
about
very fruitful discussions.
Yeah,
so
Shaza,
it has been a good event.
you mentioned about couple of very important points. I mean, when you look at the oldest and the outstanding issues, one is Palestinian issue.
Can you please repeat?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that you mentioned about two very important aspects. The role of the Security Council or the role of the United Nations. I'll just talk about, I don't want to comment, but I just want to get your attention towards that tweet by Mr. Donald Trump regarding the United Nations. That maybe it seems like that there's a bunch of people just to be there, enjoy coffee and tea, whatever they want. Now my point is, ma'am, how to convince the whole world, considering the latest development or the engagement between the Americans and the Indians, the defense pacts and so on and so forth. And obviously, Americans, they have their hegemony and they obviously, as they always say, that might is right. And then getting up India, not only for Pakistan, but for China also. So that seems to be a long-term engagement. In that particular condition, when the Americans have so much of influence over the United Nations, how can we convince the international community or the international arena that this is no more a bilateral issue, which technically for the Indians, they say it is, and how to convert that ideology into something where we can raise this issue appropriately, where we can engage them in a meaningful dialogue and get some fruitful result out of that.
Okay, so you mentioned India and U.S. relations and India's other bilateral relations in the international domain. I also mentioned this in my speech earlier today, that, the war now is an economic war. And India, when it portrays itself as a market, as a bigger economy, that's where they get the bargaining points. Pakistan, in the last 3 to 4 years, has really stepped up. And with the energy crisis going down, with the security situation getting better, with the economic development that we're seeing, the international investment that's coming in, CPEC is on its way, it's already functional. I think that we're on the right path of socio-economic development and also political stability, given the sustenance of democracy in the country now. Once we have this internal strength that was lacking for quite a few years, I believe that we will have a much better bargaining situation in the upcoming years. The Honorable Prime Minister has very strongly on multiple international forums mentioned the Kashmir issue, and he's made sure that it becomes part of every international dialogue that comes along the way. But you're right in the sense that, we really need to be more proactive. But we are strongly working on that on our international diasporas. This is just one of the first, one of the many events that we
This is just the beginning, I would say, yeah.
The idea is to activate the international diaspora, Pakistani diaspora that we have across the world, and they need to be activated to ensure that this issue takes the mainstream. And Pakistan's view is always presented on every important forum.
All right, thank you very much, Shaza Khawja, and good luck for tomorrow. Now, sir, engagement of the Pakistani diaspora. So they're talking about people like you who are living abroad in UK, who have certain influence. They have connections there. I still remember I was there and I happened to meet George Galloway. And what a man. I mean, he speaks the truth. And if you listen to him regarding Kashmir, I think he is the person who is an actual real advocate for Kashmir, sir. How to engage and what sort of challenges do you face, Lord Saab, when you're there in USA or in Belgium for that matter, or in Europe in general?
Well, in the UK, we've been advocating and also protesting and telling the parliamentarians in our government and our Foreign Office, giving them the information from the second day after Burhan Wani's martyrdom. So I don't think anybody could sort of like teach us how to lobby parliamentarians and British government. Of course, there are economic interests. Of course, there are political interests. And you mentioned geopolitical alliances and whatever's happening in the international community. You know, Britain is one of the best places for diaspora Pakistani Kashmiri communities where people not only are engaged with politics, there are councillors, about 400-500 of them, mayors, MPs, lords, MEPs.
Mayor of London.
Yeah, well, Mayor of London will not engage with the lobbying on Kashmir issue, but you know, obviously, George Galloway happens to be my friend, but he's not in politics, not in the House of Commons anymore.
He's more into media.
Well, he is in media, and so we need to focus on where people have, even when he was, sadly, because of, you know, his political stance, he was on the left of the politics, and people have moved on. But having said that, there are lots of people who are supporting Kashmir cause, but you know, 185 days. This is a great conference. There are a number of things that need to be done at home. First of all, in Azad Kashmir, every these envoys, special envoys that went from Pakistan, they didn't have any Kashmiris involved in that. And to be honest with you, there are many Pakistanis who don't even understand, politicians who don't even understand the Kashmir cause and the
Unfortunately.
issue. Unfortunately. Yeah, I know. And you know, you just talked about bilateral. Let me take this issue. It's never been a bilateral issue because India says that it's because of Simla Agreement and Lahore Declaration.
That's exactly what the point was. Yeah.
But when you have UN resolutions, this bilateral, this Simla Agreement cannot supersede UN resolutions because that's an international, because Simla Agreement is not a UN agreement. This is an agreement
between the two countries.
But not on Kashmir, between two countries on the end of war, 1971.
Yeah.
So it had nothing to do with Kashmir. And simple argument on that is that since 1971, not a single time, 44 years since, not a single time Kashmir has been mentioned in any of the, because in that agreement it said that future other disputes will be resolved bilaterally. So you've never had a conference or a summit between India and Pakistan with Kashmiris to resolve this Kashmir issue. Where there's been pressure from the international community, they wanted to meet, but meet with lots of other issues in relation to from
now
fishing
there's
rights.
a whole list now.
Well,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. So I think what you've got to realize is that, well, some of these myths that UN resolutions are too old, they were chapter 6 rather than 7, because it's a frozen topic, don't touch it, it's bilateral, India doesn't agree to it. Well, I'm telling you that there is, first of all, there's precedent where United Nations has been involved in countries like South Sudan, East Timor, where UN has been...
Sir, wherever there was this Christian community involved, remember, those issues were
I'm not allowed to say all that.
No, I can say that.
I'm not going to say
you talk about
it's a religious...
You talk... No, because technically that's what the reality is.
Well,
all about.
yes.
East Timor, the same problem.
Yeah.
You talk about Sudan, the division of Sudan, same issue.
Well, no, I agree with you, but what I want to say is that the international community seems to take notice of suffering of Christians much more than other communities. And because the power blocks, frankly, US, Europe, and sometimes other places as well, who tend to support some of these causes. But I think, you know, there are 50-odd countries, Muslim countries, OIC, Sartaj Aziz mentioned OIC contact. frankly, it's a dinner club. Frankly, it doesn't have any power. Frankly, it doesn't do anything at international level. So it's good to have somebody supporting you. But you know, when there's determination, let me give you an example. When there's determination by any country on Aleppo, on Syria, when international community, all the GCC countries, Arab countries.
But sir, let me give you an example. We all know of Dawood Ibrahim, right, sir, who's based in UAE. There was a story that his assets worth 15,000 crores were frozen a few days ago. That is the kind of influence, because when there was this engagement with the Indians, I'm talking about Mr. Ajit Doval, who is the National Security Advisor. Yeah. So he influenced the UAE government to take a step of this nature. Now, what I'm saying is that shows the kind of Indian influence, not only on the so-called friendly, Pakistani-friendly countries, but on the GCC countries and otherwise.
I don't want to discuss individual cases because there may be legalities or illegalities involved in that, because I don't know, frankly, this gentleman and where his wealth came from and how.
No, but what I'm saying is that this is the kind of influence the Indians have.
Indians do have. And frankly, this is what I want to say, is that these are Muslim countries. You know, when we say that we've got relations with Saudi Arabia and UAE and with Qatar and everybody else, then you see the same countries supporting India and not Pakistan and Kashmir cause. How many of these Arab countries have gone to the United Nations and actually even mentioned a word? I remember late Yasser Arafat sahab, when I went to meet with him in West Bank. And we met, and I told him that as a student for many, many decades, I've been supporting Palestinian issue. And I said, Yasser Arafat, you didn't support Kashmir cause.
Never did.
And you know what he said? Well, because of the socialist bloc, they were supporting us, and the capitalist bloc led by United States of America, because they were supporting Israel and Pakistan was on their side, we couldn't.
During the time of sentence.
So all that sort of comes up, and frankly, if you go back, but Pakistan has been loyal to the Muslim bloc whenever they needed any help militarily, or whether they needed any political help. Pakistan has given that. But we need to build alliances. We need to
look at Egypt. Look at so many other countries in the Middle East. They have a diplomatic relationship with the Israelis. We don't have, because for one reason. So in return, now I think it's high time to engage those countries.
For your information,
that's what I'm saying.
More Arab countries. I have actually visited with my Zionist friends at the time when I first was appointed in the House of Lords. I visited some of these Arab countries, and I've been in private meetings in some of these capitals, and I can mention Bahrain, Oman, some of these other countries where they have the Israelis have got representatives, and Pakistan doesn't talk. But on the other hand, I think it would be difficult for Pakistan to speak with Israel anyway. One, that Israel
we do not have a direct issue with them.
But I do.
Because I do for the Arab world.
But I do, because Israelis have been influencing Indians on the issue of settlement of non-Kashmiris inside Jammu and other places.
Indians are exactly following the same formula.
No, it's because the Israelis have told them to do that, because that's how they will demographically change the situation on ground. But more importantly, they will annoy the Kashmiris, and the Kashmiris will be heartbroken with thinking that they don't have any chance now because they're not in majority, and so they can change the...
and from their perspective, it's a very smart move, I would say. From their perspective.
Well,
if you look at, because you need to understand, so first of all, as they say, half the problem is solved if you know your problem. So the problem is that we do not even know what exactly the problem is. Only then you can have a cure or a remedy for that.
Then I think it's important, because Pakistan's National Assembly, I think, sort of like duplicates a lot of things. You have one Kashmir committee, which is the select committee, standing committee in Parliament. Then you have Kashmir committee led by Maulana Fazlur Rahman Sahab. Then you have the Foreign Relations Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, which only should also be, because
then
it's
we also
Foreign
have a
Office.
Minister for Kashmir Affairs.
Well, and that should be, and then you had special envoys that went around the world, and half of them didn't know what Kashmir cause and what Simla Agreement and what Lahore Declaration was, and who is in opposition and what the Kashmiris are asking for. So I think, and you know, you mentioned pellet guns. Actually, these are high-powered pellet guns that are it's not the ones that you and I used when we were young, targeting things. These are pellet guns that
like a
throw out
12-bore shot, yeah?
Yeah, but they throw out like hundreds of pellets. Yeah. So they don't just target
like
one.
a 12-bore shotgun.
Absolutely. And so, this is supposed to be a non-lethal weapon which has killed hundreds of people, thousands injured. You mentioned 17,000. I don't know exact figure, but obviously
that was given to me by the Foreign Office, 17,500.
Well, I would prefer to use even figure from the journalists inside Indian-occupied Kashmir. Foreign Office Pakistan, you can always argue that this is Pakistan's Foreign Office. How do they know? But if you use figures from the Indian-occupied Kashmir, where journalists have gathered these figures, which are very similar, by the way, and I know that Foreign Office has got these figures from them, but I would rather quote them than the Foreign Office, because then obviously legitimacy.
And you have got almost similar figures, right?
These are actually foreign. I know Nafis Zakaria Sahab is a very good friend of mine, and I know that he's taken figures, because we use them on my Twitter account. I use those figures that I've got from the Indian-occupied Kashmir. So some of the facts are obviously from Indian-occupied Kashmir, but I would prefer to actually quote from those sources rather than Pakistan Foreign Office.
All right. Now, so one more point. I mean, whenever we talk about, let's suppose for a moment, that we engage in. First of all, they're not at all ready to talk on any issue, whether it's about Sir Creek, whether it's about water issue, whether it's about Sirchan, whether it's about the LOC or the working boundary, or Kashmir is on their last, I mean, they don't even talk about that. First one and the foremost is terrorism. That's the new phenomena they've adopted, because the whole world is looking at, because for them it's the priority. Now, so my point is that whenever these two countries have engaged in a dialogue, nothing has happened, sir. So do you think even this particular cause, we call it our jugular vein, they call it there are two tongue. Kashmiris are suffering at the end of the day. People are being killed, women are being raped. And you just mentioned about 10,000 people who are just technically kidnapped, I would say. Nobody knows about their fate and their future. In such an environment, sir, when India is looked upon as not as a country, but as a market. Obviously, that is where the interest comes in, whether it's US interest. Exactly, sir. So looking at the strengths of India, and obviously they have weaknesses as well, but looking at the strengths and the weaknesses of Pakistan, if you do the comparison, do you think can they ever engage in a fruitful or a meaningful dialogue?
I'm very optimistic, because Indian
economy... So we've been optimistic for the last 70 years, but nothing has happened.
I think, you know, sometimes we've given and take. We've sort of been at a point where Pakistan certainly has wanted... The problem with the Hindu fundamentalist political parties is that if you show any weakness, they will take advantage. And if you reach out when people say out-of-box solutions for Kashmir, they think that that's their weakness, because they will accept anything. You never see any Indian BJP, Shiv Sena, Bajrang Dal, Hindutva believing, or even Congress politician who will say that we will shift away from our main cause, Akhand Bharat, Greater India, Kashmir being integral part of India. They don't actually move away from that. In the past, sadly, Pakistani politicians have sort of talked about looking for a solution, desperation, that we want to resolve the issue of Kashmir. Some people have said that they want to trade with India, they want to have good relations, our culture is same, our curries are same, our bhangra is same, and we've got other common things and we need to make peace. That is showing weakness. I tell you, I have, and Sayyid Ali Gilani, we have never shifted from our original position. That is right of self-determination in accordance with UN resolutions, nothing less, nothing more. That's a legal right in accordance with UN resolutions, international law, and that is still on statute. So long as you can stick to that, then I don't think you can lose. But if you give little, then obviously India dominates, and they've created a narrative. All this nonsense about international terrorism. First they used to say cross-border terrorism, now it's terrorism.
They
and
are
breeding
actually,
terrorism.
they've painted it, this whole entire indigenous homegrown movement for the self-determination. I mean, they have a right to talk, they have a right to be, to be away from such an occupation, sir. But unfortunately, the point is that to the Indians, they have been able to sell that narrative because of the post 9/11 scenarios, unfortunately.
But Pakistan has not been able to create a narrative. The Kashmiris have not really created. The 4 leaders inside Jammu, inside Srinagar, they've stuck to their guns, they've suffered, they continue to do that. The communities, hundreds of thousands of people who've been following them on the streets for 185 days, they have suffered.
There was a curfew imposed everywhere, sir, and there was an acute shortage of clean drinking water, medicine. They were picking up people from the hospitals and they were throwing them in the barracks. So you exactly know what kind of a torture they've all gone through. But anyway, Lord Nazir, thank you very much for your time, sir. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you tomorrow at 8. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Khuda Hafiz from our side.